The Miami apartment complex that collapsed last week shocked the nation, but it didn't shock the engineers who'd been warning about that possibility for years. They put it down on paper, didn't they, Farron? They said, here are the problems. You got cracks in the foundation. You got cracks in the wall. The whole building is sinking. The steel that's supposed to be surrounded with concrete, the cracks in that concrete is causing the steel to break down and corrode.
Yeah, and another thing too, the pool. You didn't slant it, so the water sits at the bottom underneath the pool, corroding the concrete. And as you said, that salt air from those cracks around the steel beams and that concrete, that helps erode that, the oxygen getting to it. And the engineers pointed this out in 2018. And they said, listen, you may not be in imminent danger of collapse, but the clock is ticking. Here are your problems. You need to address these as soon as possible. And even when you rewind even further than that, 2015, I think it was.
It was 2015.
Yeah, they faced a major lawsuit, which they ended up settling for similar problems with one of the tenants.
Yeah, this is not great intellectual analysis here. You know, you got salt water. Okay, it's on the salt water. The salt water corrodes. If you have cracks in the beams that hold the building up, that causes those beams to corrode. Other part of it is the building is sinking into the ground. And as it sinks in the ground, because it's built on sand, I don't care what kind of foundation you put in it, it's sinking on sand. And so there's supposed to be kind of a re-look every 40 years, 30 or 40 years. They're supposed to come in and recertify the safety of the building. My understanding of this, the worst thing about it is they were told, look, this is about a $10 million project. You know, go spend the $10 million. You've made hundreds and hundreds of millions on this building already. Spend the $10 million, and they were supposed to meet about it.
Right. That's one of the sickest parts, is that this is, you know, a relatively cheap fix. You didn't have to go and break the bank for this. You had the money. They had apparently in recent months been meeting with contractors to actually start the bidding process. But again, that's still 3 years after the engineers gave you the warning. It's 6 years after the first lawsuit you faced over not fixing these issues. They knew about these problems for years and years and years. They dragged their feet, you know, waited as long as humanly possible, and unfortunately, time caught up with them. Time beat them on this, and that's what led to this collapse and the deaths.
Yeah, I mean, you hear the 2018 report, there was no mention. It wasn't top of the report. You know what? Your building could collapse. That's the risk. Do you really have to put that in there?
Right.
Of course not. These engineers understood that every part of what we were looking at has potential to fail. Now, the problem is that you've got the same architects and you have the same builders using the same architecture structure, using the same building materials, the same process that have built other buildings right along that line, right?
Right, including the sister property to this one, which has also been evacuated now. So, yes, this could be a more systemic problem down there in South Florida. It certainly is a very vulnerable area for buildings. You know, the sea air, the salt, all of this adds up. The storms that they face, the effects of climate change in the region are absolutely making these problems worse.
Yeah, I mean, the worst thing they can do is make this into political volleyball. It's the reality. You're going to have to fix the problem.
Yeah.
And so they just need to fix it. They need to do whatever has to take place. No blame game. You did this, Governor Childs, you did whoever. You know, whatever it is, they got to deal with the problem. Back in February, the House of Representatives released an alarming report about toxic heavy metals found in popular baby foods. Now manufacturers in the hot seat facing a bundle of class actions. Attorney Madeline Penley joins me now to talk about this. You know, my takeaway on this, one of the first things I read was the FDA has an action plan. That's an oxymoron,
yeah,
isn't it?
It's discouraging. Doesn't mean anything at all.
That means nothing's going to happen. Tell us what these class action lawsuits are about.
Essentially, the biggest baby food manufacturers in the country have been poisoning your children. So these manufacturers have sold baby food that's contaminated with significantly high levels of very dangerous heavy metals like arsenic, lead, mercury, and children have been exposed to it for years.
So it's the long-term exposure that's the issue. I mean, a doctor can say, yeah, if baby eats mashed up pears that taste awful, by the way, then they're probably going to be okay for that.
Right.
But when they do it day after day after day for years, it is that long-term exposure that causes the problem, right?
Right. So part of the problem with heavy metals is the exposure kind of builds up or accumulates in the body each time somebody's exposed. So really any exposure can add to a harmful amount of heavy metals in the body.
Yeah, in other words, you don't just rid your body of heavy metals every 24 hours.
Right.
It's bioaccumulative is what they would call.
Exactly.
Some of them are what we call biopersistent.
Right.
But we do know this, it's bioactive.
Right.
It affects your systems, your brain, other systems in the body.
Right.
And they've known about the dangers of heavy metals for decades and decades. Who are the companies that are involved in this?
It's a lot of really big household names, actually. You know, like Campbell's, Beech-Nut, Gerber, Happy Baby by Nurture, and Parents' Choice by Walmart.
Doesn't that sound sick? Happy Baby
Right.
has, now my memory is Happy Baby had where it came to arsenic, it had like 600 times
Right.
what it should have, 600 parts per billion. Is that
Exactly.
right?
Yes.
And that's off the scale.
Right.
And nevertheless, Happy Baby's selling the product, and they're saying, "Gee whiz, everything's going to be okay. Your baby's going to be well taken care of." Some of them even advertise that it's organic, and you don't have to worry about it, right?
Right. And the problem with organic is, I mean, whether this is true or not, when people are purchasing organic products, they're doing it because they want it to be safer to some extent. You know, they want it to be free from harmful chemicals and things like that. So it's especially frustrating that these companies were allowed to market their product as organic and therefore safer, although it had significantly high levels of dangerous heavy metals.
What are the potential health impacts that we're talking about here? What do we expect when you take a child that's in those developmental years and you expose them to heavy metals for years?
So what we know is one, this is not some hypothetical harm that we're talking about. There are many studies that correlate heavy metal exposure to children with developmental delays. So we see things like cognitive disabilities, behavioral problems, permanent reduction in IQ, and all of these things can lead to the child needing, you know, special education programs and a reduction in their overall quality of life.
Well, I know the science has been around a long time. We know, for
Yes.
example, the lead paint cases where children would often take the paint off the wall and eat it. And,
Right.
You know,
Yeah, there's no question that this stuff is dangerous to people, especially young children, and especially at regular regimented doses like daily baby food exposure.
So there's no guesswork here. There's no what we call medical causation, scientific causation questions. That science has been out there a long time.
Right.
Is there any movement in the federal system to maybe make the FDA, for once, just one time, have the FDA do what they're supposed to do? Or is it still controlled with whoever's in office? Of course, this has been going on for so long. It's
Right.
every administration. It's not any one administration.
Right. So this issue has been on the FDA's radar for at least a decade. You know, from what we can see in publicly accessible information, they've known for at least a decade. And so we can see that if they want to, they can establish heavy metal exposure thresholds for other things. They've done it for water. You know, you can't have more than like 5 parts per billion of lead, 10 of arsenic. But for some reason, the FDA is okay with over 900 parts per billion of arsenic in baby food, which is what we're seeing. So what the FDA needs to do is develop a proactive system for detecting heavy metals in baby food so we can get this stuff off the market.
Well, I mean, don't you at least warn the parent? I mean, isn't there a
think at
failure
least.
to warn case here? Where
Yeah.
you say, look, you need to know this.
Right.
We've tested it for arsenic, and there's arsenic in here. And we tested. What mother's going to say? Yeah, that sounds good.
Right.
Let me feed this to my child.
Well, that's why they won't tell us about it, because if anybody actually knew, as far as the companies, I mean, if anybody actually knew how much dangerous material was in this food, nobody would buy it. And so actually these companies were investigated by the U.S. House of Representatives Investigation Committee, and that report was released earlier this year, so this is all publicly accessible. And what they found is that all of these companies involved that we talked about earlier either tested their product, saw the dangerous levels, and sold it anyway, or never tested their product at all. So either knowingly exposed children to a dangerous toxin or didn't care enough to figure out whether or not they were.
Yeah, at this point, full disclosure, our law firm is involved in these class actions
Right.
that are being talked about. But I think this is bigger than that. It's not a class action. You have children, the mother can say there's no other exposure my child had. They had developmental problems. Yeah, they took Happy Baby and ate it 3 times a day for 3-4 years.
Right.
You know, you do the math, you do the science, and there are plenty of experts that can say this threshold, this burden of heavy metals absolutely had a connection to these developmental problems. So to me, what I'm amazed about is that there was no national case put together. The MDL, which is
Right.
the multi-district litigation panel, should have granted that. They should have said, yeah, let's look at this nationally, but they didn't.
Right.
So, we're going to do what we always do. Go after them anyway.
Yep.
Thank you for joining me.